month ago, I was at a Boy Scout campout, and I overheard a conversation some Boy Scouts were looking forward to having some s'mores. And one kid just piped up with his plans for the evening. I'm going to have 3 s'mores. Just out of nowhere. And then, because he's talking to a couple other kids, well, I'm going to have 4. And then 5, and then 6, and then 10, and then 100. Then it got kind of crazy. They start making up numbers, a zillion, a bajillion. And then everybody knows where it goes next, right? I'm going to have infinity s'mores. And I think the person who said that, the kid who said that, expected that to kind of kill the conversation. But we know that that really doesn't, right? Because the next step after that is infinity plus 1, right? And then that started all over again, infinity plus 2, infinity times 2, infinity times infinity, right? So, but you get the feeling it should have stopped a little bit earlier than that. And so I want to take that kind of silly conversation and talk seriously about it for just a little bit and ask, what is it about infinity? Why can we do that with infinity? Just how big is it? And if you add more onto the end of it, does it get bigger? Now, mathematicians are used to playing with infinity, but most of us are not. We're still at that kind of that 8-year-old level, right? Of discussing infinity is just really big, and that's about all we know about it. But mathematicians have thought a little bit about it, especially a guy called Hilbert. And the way that he talked about it was to use an analogy of a hotel. He said, imagine you have a hotel, a very large hotel, and it's all full, no vacancies. You get an extra guest who wants a room. No matter how big that hotel is, you're not going to be able to find a room for that person without kicking somebody else out. But if your hotel was slightly bigger, in that it was an infinite hotel, Hilbert argued you could find room. All you would have to do, and you wouldn't have to kick anybody out, all you would have to do was tell every one of your present guests just to move down a room. So the person in room 1 would move to room 2, the person in room 2 would move to room 3, and so on. And because it's an infinite hotel, every single one of your guests will have a room to move to. Which kind of sounds weird, but it's not, there's no last room in an infinite hotel. So everybody moves one room down, easy instruction to follow, and you've just freed up room number 1 for that guest. Great. Hilbert said, I could do that with 2 guests as well. So infinity plus 2, I can handle that in my infinite hotel. He also said, I can do it with if I got an infinite number of extra guests showing up, or an infinity of infinite sets of guests showing up. But I'll let you Google those solutions to figure out how he does those, because the instructions, the way that he manages to do that is a little bit different. But the point of all these stories is that our intuitions about infinity and being able to fit infinity plus 1 or infinity plus 2 things into an infinite hotel, which means that infinity plus 1 actually just equals infinity, it's no bigger than infinity, is because we have these intuitions about numbers that we try and use on infinity because we think infinity is a number. But infinity is not really a number. Infinity is a concept. And so our mistakes that we make, and that those 8-year-olds around the campfire were making when they were using infinity in that way, is because we are using our intuitions that we've developed with our experience in numbers, especially our arithmetical intuitions about addition and multiplication and things like that, on something that isn't a number. It's a concept of boundlessness or limitlessness. Now, what I wanted to use this for was to talk about the importance of having kind of correct intuitions, because you can, well, you're not getting into too much trouble having kind of bad intuitions about infinity around a Boy Scout campfire, right? But one of the themes of this TEDx conference is infinite horizons. And because I'm a philosopher and an epistemologist, right, one of the infinite horizons one of the things that makes me think of is knowledge. Infinite knowledge, and the fact that all of us TEDxers are explorers. So we like to, one of the things that I think we reach for is images to explain that infinity of knowledge that's out there for us to explore. And the horizon idea is a compelling one. But there's a really kind of subtle problem with thinking of exploring through our epistemic adventures, our knowledge adventures, exploring new knowledge, in the same way as terrestrial exploration. The neat thing about this kind of imagery is that, of course, the horizon is just an apparent barrier. Right? It describes the limit of your knowledge, but as you approach it, the barrier retreats, right? Revealing more territory. So that's great. That's how knowledge behaves. And so the problem with this kind of imagery, though, especially this image of a globe with that horizon that retreats, is that even though there isn't a boundary and your exploration can be infinite, walk long enough, adventure far enough, and what happens? You do what Magellan did. You circumnavigate, right? You start to retrace your steps. So if we have this as our intuition about how knowledge is, it turns out that even the lack of barriers, right? Having a boundless and limitlessness exploration of knowledge doesn't mean that the knowledge itself is infinite, boundless, or limitlessness. Right? It could be limited. We could live on a very small globe of knowledge. And from time to time, you get people who talk about how science is great and our explorations as a human society are great, but we're nearing the end. And all that's left, we've almost covered the globe, and all that's going to be left for future generations is dotting I's and crossing T's, which may be true. But I would like to argue for a different conception, a different image of knowledge and our exploration of it than this one. It's slightly different, but it's importantly different, and that is the imagery of a candle in the dark, which folks like Carl Sagan and Albert Einstein used occasionally to describe their attitude towards knowledge. So in this image, you have, of course, knowledge represented by the light, and learning makes that light grow stronger, which pushes back the darkness. So again, you have a horizon between the illuminated region and the darkness. As you learn more here, you're not traveling forwards to the horizon, you're pushing it back, you're making it larger, exposing, right? So the more you learn, you're exposing more areas of ignorance, which also seems to work well with knowledge, because the more answers you get, the more questions they raise, right? So that sounds good. The difference here, though, of course, is that there's no retracing of steps as you travel around the globe, right? Here we're talking about an infinite expanse. You can push out as far as you like in any direction, and there's still darkness out there to illuminate. So the important difference between this kind of image and the other one is that not only are the barriers, that horizon, merely apparent, but the vista itself is truly infinite. Now, can we know that knowledge actually is like this rather than like this? No, you can't. But what I'm here to argue about today, to convince you of, is that you ought to act as if knowledge is like a candle in the dark rather than a horizon. Because the horizon has that subtle limitation to it, that it keeps open that possibility that you will soon run out of new territory. And if you have that in the back of your mind, whenever you reach something that looks like a barrier or something that looks like familiar territory, you might believe it. And you might stop looking. You might go, oh, got it all now. Right? Whereas if you believe in a candle in the dark, you're going to treat those barriers or that apparently familiar territory as only apparent. And you're going to try and push beyond it. Now, you might not be able to, because those barriers might be real. There might be things that are truly unknowable, right? or that territory might be familiar for a good reason, than that it is familiar territory and you've just kind of used up all the learning has been done. But having this kind of attitude towards knowledge is the only way that you're going to truly test those limits of knowledge. It's an optimistic kind of attitude here. And I've got, since I'm a philosopher, I have fancy words for it. But those fancy words basically boil down to that intuition that I think you need to have, not because it's true, but because it's useful. Because it's crucial so that you don't give up too early. Because if you do have in the back of your mind an intuition that allows for the possibility of barriers or other kinds of limitations, then that's going to tend to make those self-fulfilling prophecies about your exploration. You're going to tend to be satisfied when you reach barriers or run out of what looks like new territory, because your intuition is compatible with both of those things, or one of those things. Whereas if you have the imagery of a candle in the dark, you're going to be dissatisfied and keep pushing. So I would encourage you all to think of knowledge as a candle in the dark, so that you never stop exploring. Thank you.